Good afternoon, everyone. I am Bianca Durani, president of Aperio Philanthropy. We're a fundraising firm specializing in relationship-based fundraising and providing hands-on support for nonprofits. We're thrilled to invite you today to the Pivoting in Practice series. This is the first webinar in our series that's focused on answering this question of how do we pivot fundraising in the wake of COVID and all the crises that we are facing. Today's conversation is going to build on the conversations we've been having all spring and summer about what we need to be doing and dig into the next layer of what does it look like in real life? Now that we're moving from talking about pivoting to doing the pivoting, what's changing? What are we learning? What's working? What's not working? How can we come together as an industry? Our illustrious panel here are representatives of the healthcare sector, which will be the focus of this conversation. In the next month or coming weeks, we'll be focusing on two other sectors, social justice and advocacy, and arts and culture. We hope you will join us for those as well. So with my thanks to our panel for joining us today, I'm going to turn it over to our co-host, the NYUSPS George Heyman Program for Philanthropy and Fundraising, Michelle DAmico. Thanks.
Thank you, Bianca. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle DAmico, and I'm the Director for Non-Credit and Public Programs at the NYUSPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Events like these form a part of our efforts to prepare a community of informed global citizens to create and support positive change. We do this through our two graduate programs, an MS in Global Affairs and an MS in Global Conflict Security and Cybercrime, our non-credit courses, and our professional certificates. We are also home to the George H. Heyman Program for Philanthropy and Fundraising. The Heyman Program offers professionals pathways to gain and deepen knowledge and skill sets within the philanthropic sector. Courses are taught by an expert team of faculty practitioners who bring deep insight and knowledge to the classroom. I'm delighted to introduce to you one of those faculty members, Richard Feiner, who will be moderating today's conversation. Richard is a long-standing member of the Heyman faculty team and currently serves as Director for Foundation and Corporate Relations for Weill Cornell Medical. Before I turn this over to Richard in today's panel, I'd like to encourage those of you who have questions to use the Q&A tool to submit them to us. We will be recording today's session, and the identities of those who ask questions will be removed from the recording before distribution on our Facebook page. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Richard for today's conversations. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you, NYU and Aperio Philanthropy, for putting this panel and discussion together. I'm delighted to help moderate the discussion. And as has been established, it's pivoting in practice. So we're going to hear some real practical advice about how nonprofits and fundraising teams can move forward in our new COVID reality, and how to move forward with fundraising efforts without losing sight of the nonprofit mission. So in other words, how are fundraising strategies pivoting to engaging donors in new ways to maintain support and increase support? How are they helping to advance the relevancy of the organizational mission, or to remain true to the mission even as the mission of the nonprofit organization changes and evolves in this new environment? And how are fundraising efforts helping to generate sustainable revenue, contributed or unearned revenue as well as earned revenue, building resiliency into operations? And I'm delighted to moderate with our distinguished panel of experts. I will briefly introduce them. We have Dr. Ruth Brown, who is President and CEO of Ronald McDonald House, New York. Ronald McDonald House works to support children and families battling cancer by providing a home away from home and an environment that reduces stress and the financial burdens so that families can focus on what is most important, the health of their children. So thank you very much, Dr. Brown. We also have Shelley Hayes, who is the Chief Development Officer of Community Health Charities. Community health charities empowers people to improve health and well-being by raising awareness and resources for health. They support education, treatment, and prevention. They bring organizations together to improve community health, and they also work to increase the capacity of their nonprofit organization members. So thank you very much, Shelley. And we also have Scott Kennedy, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of Solving Kids Cancer. Solving Kids Cancer finds, funds, and advocates for breakthrough treatment options to cure children with the most fatal childhood cancers. So thank you, Scott, for joining us today. So let's jump right in. And the first question really is very practical. So what are some of the most significant changes in your organization's fundraising strategy in light of the environment we are currently in? And I'll focus this first question to you, Dr. Brown.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So for the Ronald McDonald House, we've had a very successful track record of fundraising that has been largely event-driven. The overwhelming majority of funds that were raised have come from probably 27 standing events. And so in this pandemic, we have certainly had to rethink that strategy and adjust in many ways. And so where we could, we have certainly made a number of those events virtual, but our North Star isn't planning virtual events. It's definitely thinking strategically about what are the opportunities from a very successful track record of events fundraising to bring our base into other forms of fundraising. Digital would be one. We're starting to really look at the opportunities where we haven't before as much around corporate and foundation grant procurement. Those are a few of the ways that we're trying to pivot to meet the needs of the organization while planning for the future.
Excellent. No, that's very nice. So you're actually, the organization is viewing this as a real opportunity to venture into areas that you have not ventured into before.
Absolutely.
So that's a positive. That's a nice thing.
Absolutely.
Shelley, I'll ask you the same question. So what are the most significant changes in the fundraising strategies that you are familiar with now?
Yeah, well, our organization partners with more than 2,000 health organizations across the nation. And we've completed 2 surveys since COVID started of our partners. And as we all know, or have heard, how events has really demolished their fundraising efforts. About 95% reported losses that require letting go of staff and offices. And so as they've been pivoting and as we've been pivoting ourselves, one of the things when we look at the corporate side and our corporate partners, we're saying if your employees in workplace giving have not been able to meet their pledges or are not able to participate in the 2020 campaign, maybe the corporate partner themselves can step up and make a contribution on behalf. So as Dr. Brown said, it is an opportunity for not only for us to look at new ways to approach our corporate partners so that they can help ease their employees, changes and things that are happening at home. So really going directly to the corporate partner to make that up has been one of them. Looking forward to sharing a couple more that include corporate campaigns is one area that we heard a lot about, where they're putting their corporate campaigns on hold. But now funders who are out there have money because they're not funding that. And so that is pivoting. So really knowing their funders and being able to pivot with them beyond what their traditional corporate campaign or what their traditional grant was for.
Oh, that's exciting as well. So what Dr. Brown was saying about them, that the Ronald McDonald House New York venturing into new areas that were untapped to the organization, you're seeing how organizations that have current relationships with donors, they're finding new approaches to engage those donors, and then listening to those donors' own challenges and trying to meet them where they are. That's exciting too. This is all leading to really interesting new areas for us. Scott, I'll address the same question to you. So significant changes in fundraising strategies for solving kids' cancer.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Richard, and thanks, Bianca and Michelle, for being a part of the panel. So one of the things we're not doing, which was easily, attractive to think about, which is to try to invent new programs and I guess I'll say like large fundraising campaigns that were on the scale of the live events that we had planned. What we really wanted to do was try to, in the immediate term, is salvage what we had laid before us. As Dr. Brown said, our organization is very dependent on live events and being in New York City, face-to-face meetings with donors as well as leaders from some of the fundraising groups that we normally would engage with and can count on from year to year. So while it was tempting to try to reinvent and replace those live events with something very creative and ambitious, we decided to try to salvage what we had planned. And that was just very personal communications to try to still get sponsorships, donations, which I have to report weren't as successful as what we would do in a normal event. But the short term was to shift to digital, as well as dust off some of the things that we'd always been wanting to do or have maybe let go a little dormantly in the past, which would be the grant seeking from foundations and corporates. And so what we decided to do is take that approach and be very strategic about it for the longer term and develop that so that we'd be successful and have the great things to bring to them, not just coming to them saying, hey, we have a revenue stream that's plugged and we need money, but we're actually evolving our mission and having programs that are very compelling. And that takes some time to develop. But in the immediate term, what we decided to do is really shift to digital. And we have a month right now, which is September, which is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And specifically what we did was we typically have awareness campaigns going on, which aren't driven too much by fundraising, but we pivoted those programs to make them a fundraising program. So where we would normally just try to get awareness and engagement through social media and communications with our supporters, we've really tried to hone in and make that fundraising specific so that in the immediate term we could get some traction and track record with successful digital fundraising, but build that out so that in 2021, not to plan that we would have live events again, but really expect 2021 to be the same as 2020 and not rely on live. So the immediate thing is to not panic and still engage as much as possible, but really look to do the longer term planning for the bigger sort of replacements of the live events.
Well, that's excellent. Thanks, Scott. So the big takeaway is don't panic. So that's good. But yeah, but one thing that I like very much you were saying, and I think all the panelists can respond to this, obviously a switch to digital because, face-to-face traditional fundraising cultivation tools and things and strategies cannot work for us currently. And who knows, in the future, whether we're ever going to go back to those type of tactics. But then how these new fundraising approaches are responding to mission or are they feeding the mission, and how your organizational missions are changing to reflect the new fundraising realities? Curious if our panelists could speak to the relevance of the mission in light of the new fundraising approaches that you're embracing, whether it's changing the mission in any way.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. And please call me Ruth. So our mission hasn't changed. If anything, our strategy for funding the mission is changing, but our mission remains the same. And I think where there's an opportunity to engage in digital fundraising, it's an opportunity to be in touch with our donors and funders and supporters and volunteers more often. And that's really important because it gives us the opportunity to also say, how are we serving the mission in this pandemic, right? So in our case, the Ronald McDonald House had to close all its communal spaces, deliver food to families' rooms, make sure that we were taking all the precautions like other organizations. And so our donors needed to know that we were still open, because many thought we might have closed. And we're really proud that we were not in a position to have to close during this pandemic. So being able to communicate with your donors more frequently, digital offers that opportunity too, quicker and more broadly. And when we think about who supports the Ronald McDonald House, there are 8,000 volunteers behind this machine serving families. And so when we closed our communal spaces, we also closed the doors to our volunteers. And we have found ways to engage our volunteers virtually in ways that continue to support the house during this pandemic and likely beyond.
That's excellent. Thank you, Bruce. So mission has not changed, but you're finding more opportunities to engage with your supporters and all of your stakeholders right now. That's right. Shelley, how about some of the corporates or at least other stakeholders that you engage with?
Yeah, CHC has been creating healthier communities for 65 years across America. But one of the things that has started to emerge over the last several years is going from chronic illness diseases to working on health equity. And when the pandemic came, and then heightened by Minneapolis and everything, this has really heightened and shown us the need that we need to go in overdrive of where we were going. So we were going in the direction, sort of the evolution from the chronic illness space to the health equity space, but we have been given ample opportunity now, both from the programmatic side, where we're seeing more and more programs in these areas pop up and actually brought to light in our communities that we're working in. So it's really just actually put us in hyper speed to where we were going.
Interesting. So at least these corporate entities or the private sector funders are seeing the relevance of missions, but in light of some of the societal context in which we all function now.
Absolutely, because they have employees in those communities. So, yep.
Right. And Scott, you alluded to some of this in your switch into digital, but wonder if you wanted to reflect a bit on this as well in terms of your organization's mission, and are you adapting the mission in any way, or are you working within this context that all of us now find ourselves in, the changed social environment, if you will?
Yeah, so what Ruth stated, I think, was very exciting and powerful, and I agreed with her that the mission hasn't changed because we can't be changing the mission just based on the environment shifting. But I think what it is that we're able to realize some parts of the mission that we might have spoken about but haven't necessarily delivered on. and it gives an opportunity to do that. So as an example, we talked about, in our organization, childhood cancer is, it affects children. It's the leading cause of death, but it's still children are a part of a smaller community when it comes to cancer. And so we've always thought that it's a global approach to cures. So by looking at the COVID opportunity, which was really I'll call it an opportunity, but we were able to kind of finally realize a global ambition because the research community itself was captive, that we could actually engage with them being at home and also not traveling for conferences, et cetera, to be able to put together some of the things that we've always dreamed about doing, such as task force and strategic working groups to look at some problems and have discussions. So we've been able to assemble some really good teams of people that we've never been able to assemble before, and give them an agenda and give them some of the tasks to identify some of the greatest unmet needs, and actually put together some projects that we can come together as a community to fund, and also to agree to collaborate and working, because they're structured just like we are as a panel from different organizations. It's really kind of opening up a different mindset about collaboration. So we're really trying to take advantage of that moment in time to make the global footprint that we want to. And so not only is that serving our mission, but it's also providing, really good, I guess, report back stories on the fundraising side to be able to just give them a different message other than we need money, COVID impact, to real practical examples of how we're able to realize certain things that we couldn't before, and make them excited about some of these more pie in the sky ideas that we've always wanted to, try to execute on, but finally can. And so I think that's the exciting opportunity, which isn't changing the mission. It's just really kind of supporting the real ambitious parts of our mission that we've always wanted to take on.
That's terrific. So I was struck, Scott, when you were saying that, meeting unmet needs. So you're meeting the unmet needs within your organization itself, taking the time now to find out how to operationalize on some of these pie in the sky things you've wanted to do, but weren't able to focus on at the time. So meeting institutional unmet needs, but then also equating that to meeting the unmet needs within the discipline you're working. So within childhood cancer.
Yep, that's it.
That's exciting. That's great. And so there have been, talking now about motivations, what is motivating your organization's supporters. There have been some surveys out. Chronicle Philanthropy has articles about, charitable giving surveys in light of COVID. And in June, there was a survey that said, in terms of, perhaps individual givers, that 63% see no change in their giving or anticipate no change in their giving, and 6% plan to increase giving to their causes that they support. And then in August, a report on donors of 2.5 thousand plus, so some can be called major donors. At year-end giving, those interviewed anticipate giving the same amount. 70% anticipated giving at those consistent levels, and 18% plan to increase giving. Again, that's just a snapshot of time over the summer, coming into the fall with all these other pressing things that are happening in society. How are you moving forward, all of your organizations, to understand what is motivating the supporters and responding to their needs? I think, Shelley, you might be able to respond to this with some of your own survey work.
Yeah, so in response to different industries, we have a number of those frontline workers, not first responders, but frontline worker companies, and their struggle with, asking for what, can be done when it's their families that are needing the support. And so we're working on giving days throughout the rest of the year that, okay, if this isn't the right time, then what could we do to supplement that at a different time throughout the year, maybe a one-time giving day. I think the other real piece that has struck us is their desire to do more, but not have the direction. So they're actually looking for us for the direction. So that's why these are so important to have these conversations, because people aren't exactly sure what the next step is to do. But if we can say, hey, we worked with a company here or a law firm here, this is some of the practices that they've done, we've been able to pivot, much easier in those scenarios when they've actually come to us for the expertise. And I think that's going to continue to happen.
So excellent, thank you. So you're listening again to your stakeholders, and they're sharing with you some of their successes or what their priorities are, and then you're passing that along to others as well. So it's basically increased awareness, driving awareness, and sharing best practices or interests.
Absolutely.
And Ruth, wondering if you wanted to comment a bit as well, to things that Scott was saying also about meeting unmet needs, or also understanding what is of interest now to your current stakeholders.
I think both Shelley and Scott mentioned two things that resonate a lot for me. One is around social equity, and the other is around this meeting unmet needs. And for the Ronald McDonald House, it's very much about what can we provide to these families and children who are undergoing treatment. But what are their needs, and to what extent can we structure partnerships that will provide a seamless circle of support, regardless of whether we provide it directly or we provide it in partnership with a partner who can meet that particular need of the family. And so when we think about resources for the organization, we think about the partnerships, we think about the volunteers, we think about the dollars that come in to support the mission, but all of this comes together to provide a seamless circle of support. And I think that's really important, and it's something that donors want to understand, that this is not a siloed organization that is raising funds in a vacuum. We're an important part of a community that has folks who we don't need to reinvent every wheel, right? That is integrated with a community of other giving organizations that can meet the needs of families. So I think that's really important. I think the other piece for us is that we were working on a strategic plan starting in January. And so when COVID really hit, we had to change the timing of what we were going to deliver, but the opportunity of continuing to do planning, difficult under the circumstances, but the opportunity to continue to do planning was really a saving grace for us. Because as we lean more into foundation fundraising, and as we lean into our digital fundraising, we need to be able to say to our donor community, where's this organization going? And so having the strategic plan as to provide the guidance for the North Star gives us the talking points about what are we asking you to buy into, not just relief in a pandemic, but to buy into a future that you can partner with us on going forward.
Well, that's wonderful. I was struck, Ruth, by your saying this seamless circle of support, and certainly in terms of your strategic planning, that you know, one of the things is you have the time now to actually focus on that, but taking into that
The circumstance.
But the seamless circle in that, you know, you can really understand that, you know, the necessity to break down these silos so that you're focusing on this area, but you're seeing what other colleagues are doing, other, you know, other stakeholders with whom Ronald McDonald House New York engages, and incorporating what their needs are. Because I'm assuming that we're facing similar challenges among all of our stakeholders. So this ability to collaborate is so much more important.
Yes.
Scott, maybe you wanted to mention a bit more. You were alluding to a lot of this work already. So perhaps some more. I'm wondering if you could give us some specific examples that you've been spearheading.
Sure. Back to the donors and what is attracted them and what's resonating. Just a little report back on that. What I'm finding is that when we start talking about specific examples or talk about specific children even and families, that I guess I can exemplify that we're helping in a way. I think those things really resonate well in this time, because I think we're people's mindsets are about helping individuals and what impact the pandemic and maybe the economic situation has on individuals. And for us, you know, the story wasn't COVID, but it was really about access to clinical trials, which were essential for certain children that were facing a relapse and didn't have any other treatment options but to go on an experimental treatment. And so some of those were affected by services being, you know, reallocated to adults, and so and personnel and labs and everything. So, you know, we have to try to get involved in some of the direct service with clinical care at times, especially if we have our own projects or funds invested. That gives us a good foothold there. And so I think doing that work was really important for us, just, you know, part of our mission, but also in engaging the donors and supporters in the way we communicate. And then as far as the collaborations, yeah, it was, you know, started by the fact that we would talk to other nonprofits about, hey, what are you guys doing now that the event season is canceled? Talking about how do we pare down our office space or think about working differently in the future. So that created an opportunity to, as Ruth was talking about, create like the partnerships around the circle of support. Some of the things that we're not doing ourselves, but to engage other organizations. So a specific example would be that we decided to put on some webinars that would involve 6 other organizations that I guess would be different than ours, to be able to round out a complete circle of service and provide access to thought leaders in a webinar context with a Q&A that some of our end users or the people we serve would never normally have access to. So by having other organizations complement that service and come together and feel, you know, invested in the spirit of collaboration, I think we're able to provide many more value adds than we could as a single organization. So we were able to, one successful example of an outcome of that was through one of our webinars. We had a lot of academics involved in it as well, and they felt so empowered by this webinar that we actually all came together to write a published paper about the experience. And the specific theme was about how COVID impacts cancer care in childhood cancer. So, you know, that was a wonderful opportunity that not only provided a public service in the form of a paper, but empowered all the other organizations and stakeholders to feel really good about coming together.
Well, that's exciting. Is this something that Solving Kids Cancer had done in the past? Had you participated in some sort of, you know, position paper or research paper before?
Not in this way. Very specialized in a certain topic and more towards our organization and what we're doing. So this was broader and much more, I think, impactful. So it was a real new thing for us.
Great, thank you. Shelley, does this resonate with some of the interests of your organization's stakeholders as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had received a fairly substantial grant from a funder in Indianapolis. And as you know, the first initiative or the first wave of kind of pivoting came, they said, okay, how do you need to use this money and adapt? And so they've really been walking with us to be able to funnel the funds. I think everyone is in it together. We are stronger together. We are better together. And I am seeing that from the funders that we are working with, because they want to have impact and real change. And so they're willing to say, okay, this was what was on the table, but how do we adapt? And so that grant specifically has changed twice since COVID, and that's unheard of to, put in your proposal, be granted the money, and then have the scope actually change a couple times before the reporting period is even done.
So are you seeing an increased flexibility among the supporters?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things with our corporate partners across the country. Typical solicitation or giving season is in the fall. That's sort of the typical time that it's happened. We have had only one group that has said we're not going to be able to do one in 2020. We've had a number of groups who've said, hey, we want to push it until 2021. We need a little bit more time to adapt and adjust and make sure our team feels comfortable with what they're doing. So as they're, we're happy to adjust with them. So as long as they're not walking away from the opportunities to support these programs, but they're not wanting to. There is a ton. And I would say the flexibility is from the individual donor all the way up to the bigger foundations that we work with.
Excellent. I think all this bodes well for our sector. Certainly one of the questions I'd like us to think about is, or reflect on is, yes, we've been forced to pivot as we've been discussing, but what are the long-term impacts of these pivots? The question is this going to change fundraising or how we interact with our supporters? Or is this sort of, we're responding to the current realities, but when normalcy, whatever that might look like, returns, will we go back to the old ways? I'm wondering if we could have a few ideas about whether there's long-term sustainability of these pivots that we're seeing right now.
I'll take a stab at that. I think that the diversification of the funding base for any not-for-profit organization is critical, like you would do in your own personal portfolio. And so that is a sustainability issue. The answer to sustainability is to have a diverse portfolio of ways that you can support the organization. And so I think that, if we are forced by a pandemic to lean in that way, then that's fine, because we should all be stronger for it in the longer run. I think what is hopeful is the opportunity for deep partnership with our funders and the ways that we are listening to each other. So the ways that foundations, for example, are looking at the need for organizations to have operating funds and to be able to say, here's what we need. It may not fit directly into your grant guidelines, but this is what we need, and this is what the long-term impact of supporting us can be. So I think that those are real opportunities. They have existed before. I think a pandemic makes it really critical and time sensitive. But I also don't think, I mean, you know, we're talking about coronavirus now. Who knows what it is tomorrow? So I think the lessons that we take from today are the tools that we use for tomorrow.
That's nice. Thank you. Do you have is there like a specific example of a dialogue you've had with a stakeholder that, you know, reflecting what you've just said?
Sure. So I mentioned that we were working on a strategic plan, and in working on that strategic plan, we are thinking about how the organization diversifies its funding. And we have gone to thought leaders around fundraising and asked a whole range of questions. And what is really clear to the Ronald McDonald House is that we have a great brand and reputation, and it's very hard, as Scott will attest to, that to not want to help kids with cancer. But the long term is, where are you going with this, right? And so the ability to be able to have that conversation in depth, this is the roadmap that's going to take us to the future. These are the things we want to do. This is how we want to expand our reach. This is what we're thinking about doing, is an opportunity for any conversation with any funder. It may be a special funder that decides they want to invest in what we're doing, but that's the thought starter for any conversation with a funder, which is, what are we asking you to partner with on and buy into, which is our future.
Right. And another word for future is the resiliency. So the resiliency of the organization, the resiliency of the mission.
Right.
And so what we're seeing, what I'm learning from this conversation is all of these pivots are really feeding that increased resiliency on many levels and all throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Right. Scott, you've mentioned, you've spoken to this, but wondering if you wanted to add a few more words to it before we open things up to questions from our audience.
Ruth really laid the ground out well on that point. So yeah, the diversity is really important, and it's exposed because the live event, which we rely on so much in New York City, is really not sustainable as far as relying on that anymore. So, and then the communication part, it reminds me that we would catch our greatest supporters up to all that we're up to, you know, in the live setting, in the live event, in the live face-to-face meetings, and the small group meetings. And so that's just not possible. And so I think the open conversation, and to treat donors a little differently as partners, as you said, and give them part of the strategic vision and take them on the journey as far as how you develop it and how you get there, I think are both like interesting to them, but also compelling, and make them feel invested much more. So we're doing that sort of ad hoc, and I think it needs to be institutionalized, which is a longer term goal. And then yes, to ensure supporters and stakeholders that there is sustainability, and to show them how you're planning for that as well. I think once they feel a part of the team mentality, that not only will they stick with you, but in times when maybe it's easier to ask for a larger donation, that they would be there for you, instead of the 1 or 2 times a year where you invite them to the live events. And so I think it's just it's a good thing that, you know, we have this opportunity, but it's easy to neglect if things go back. So I think that the thing is to stick to some of these things, stick with and implement as a long-term goal and practice of investing with your stakeholders, demonstrating sustainability, demonstrating vision, and letting them know that you're there today, but you'll also be there for the future so that they can feel hopeful as well. And Ruth, I appreciate the term that you attach it, that you feel hopeful, because I believe you.
That's excellent. Well, thank you. This has been really wonderful. And we're opening up now to some questions from our audience. And there's a question here for you, Ruth. There's a question about sharing some examples of how Ronald McDonald House is engaging with your volunteers virtually rather than in the face-to-face.
Sure. So first of all, the volunteer core, as I like to call it, that supports this house has done everything from coming in and doing a full-scale cleaning to serving meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner to our families, to entertaining families, to taking them on trips. I mean, the range of things our volunteers do. But there are also volunteers who are providing their professional expertise. And so as we have had to operate pretty remotely, virtually, we've also leaned in on that and asked volunteers who could support us with our planning efforts to support us. But throughout this pandemic, our volunteers have sent food to this house to feed our families. They have helped in our fundraising by hosting their own fundraisers virtually that folks have participated in, and the resources have come to this house. So those are some of the ways. So there's the practical skills that they're offering, as well as the resources that they're raising, and then the very practical ways that they are meeting the needs of our families by providing meals and other things.
That's nice. Great. I'm wondering, Shelley, some of your experiences, how others are they doing similar things to what Ruth was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're having to take what is happening in a community and adjusting to it from every level, and so bringing the right people to the to the conversations and to the table, getting the right people connected to the problem actually leads you to the funding a lot easier, because having either the local government or the local chamber and all of these people who want to see the community succeed, bringing them, then they'll also bring the funders with them as well.
Great. Then another question for you, Shelley. What type of health nonprofits have the biggest need to pivot from your own research?
Yeah, that's a great question. From what we saw, mental health organizations are seeing the biggest hit. We can make some assumptions that mental health is still seen as a luxury in many communities. So definitely that has been the highest reported. I think medical research shows the least resiliency, with the highest reported number of layoffs and office closings. So it's a little bit over the gamut of revenue coming in, and then also resiliency in those two categories.
Great. And then another question, going back to the idea of actual, levels of support through donations. Have you experienced drops in donations? And similarly, or related to that, what is the cultivation time that your organizations, or the people that you're in touch with, Shelley, for you, what is the cultivation time that you believe will be needed to bring in, to meet current levels or previous levels of support, or bringing in new donors who can provide new support?
Yeah, so our partners are really on that trajectory of figuring that out with their individual and major donors. I would say for CHC, when our major work is in the workplace, We had gotten through the campaign season in the fall of 2019 before COVID hit. And so our revenue for the coming year was already in place, for lack of a better word. And so we have had a little bit longer trajectory of the effect of this. And so now as we're heading back into the fall when campaign season is happening, this is where we're having to pivot and say, oh, you want to have a spring campaign, or instead of having a traditional 2-week campaign with your employees, let's do a giving day in April around World Health Day and one in July with the kids going, getting their checks before schools, those kind of things. So for us personally, we're going to start seeing the biggest impact when it comes from the corporate and workplace giving now. So let's have this conversation again in another 6 months to report back on that one.
Okay, we can do that. That's good. Thank you. This has been really wonderful. Your advice and experience is terrific. You're obviously, have a wealth of knowledge about this, but a question for all of us. What advice would you give to many in our audience who are just, new to fundraising or just embarking on their fundraising careers, and all they've known is this current climate? What advice might you give to the newbies to our field?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
One of the best pieces of advice, and you've picked up on it as we've had the conversation, that I ever received was, ask for advice and they'll give you money. Ask for money and they'll give you advice. So, but it's the concept of listening to the needs, seeing if you can help meet the needs or meet what that is. So I think that is just the basic fundamental for me.
I agree with you 100%, Shelley, and I think 2 things. One, we are in such a difficult period of time with a pandemic and our social justice smashing each other at the same time. And you, Shelley, talked about, just the whole idea of social equity in the midst, renewed. I think that so many people ask the question in the funding community, where do you fit in as an organization? And being able to articulate that is critical in a real way. And if you can't articulate it, you need to figure out how you fit in, right? That's so important. I think the other piece of it is for folks who are coming into the field, and this is what they are experiencing. We're in uncertain times, and they're going to be uncertain. And I think that we need to, get comfortable with the uncertainty. And that, I think, will serve us in the long run. We have experienced a crisis. Our communities are in crisis, but there's a level of discomfort that people are having a hard time dealing with. And I think that's our new normal.
That's terrific. So, in terms, we all of our organizations need to plan and have some strategic planning in mind, but being able to live with uncertainty and to be resilient in that regard, and basically take the punches as they come and adapt accordingly. Scott, want to add in anything to this as well?
Yeah, I think communications would be a key thing that would be consistent. And I think, as Ruth pointed out, like much more frequently be in touch. And again, bring people along for the ride. So as far as, a newbie coming into the field, I think that they shouldn't lose touch with what went before necessarily, because there's a lot of value in obviously live events and face-to-face engagement. But it's true, this is really kind of a wake-up call to all organizations to be able to address and have an answer for the things that have been pointed out that we're facing in the immediate term. And so I think to look through the services we provide and keep that lens in mind will not only excite and engage the new people that are part of raising money for the organization, but it complements the responsibility that we have in nonprofit to be aware and addressing not just the tunnel vision of what we're working on, but to look at the whole big picture. And I think to be able to communicate those things in small bits over time and to show that you're invested will engage the donors and kind of make them stand apart from other causes that are not as thoughtful, but are still, I guess, really in the panic mode of trying to hit people for funds. It's really a conversation and an ongoing conversation. And I think, like Shelley mentioned, very much about listening. And so we just have to become better listeners and stick with it and be consistent. Because at the end of the day, it's all about addressing the needs of everybody, including our donors and supporters, and just showing that we're empathetic and aware and responsible.
That's nice. Great. So we're almost out of time, and I just wanted to thank you all again. And perhaps since we want to close this up, basically closing statements. What are the biggest lessons learned you've from this experience in COVID, and what parting advice you might want to give? So Ruth, maybe you want to.
Sure. I think that we had been thinking about our partners, whether they're our hospital partners or other community-based organizations, our funding partners, and the list goes on. And I think this pandemic really showed us how we could lean on our partners and how the opportunity to chart the path forward with them is much more vast than we even anticipated. And so, and our academic partners too, Richard. So I would say that the need for structured and meaningful partnerships was a real, not lesson learned, but certainly something that we could depend on and something that we look forward to building.
Okay, great. Shelley, any last word?
Yeah, I mean, I think being agile with the times, but keep pressing forward, because there's creativity and innovation to be had. And so really teaming up and, strengthening that relationship. I don't think a call with a company or a foundation starts without really hearing how they're doing right now, because we're all in such different times. And so just staying agile to where the funder is at and the direction that, if it can still work, tag along and work in tandem with them.
Nice. Scott, anything else to add? You've addressed this, but maybe just final word.
Sure. Yeah, just that it's a time for rethinking and being brave, and having conversations that you may not have normally had. And so that's a great thing. And I think to just be vulnerable when you're talking to board members or anyone else, and being honest and open, providing hope. You don't want to be doom and gloom in your outward communications. You want to be realistic, but at the same time, you always want to, that's what we're about, achieving a mission. We're always hopeful. So I think we want to keep that beacon of hope alive. And having conversations we wouldn't normally have is great, and discussion points that we would want to bring people together and make them feel that we, I guess, need to come together to help everybody better than we could do alone.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. So Bianca and Michelle, going back to you to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everybody who was able to join us for today's conversation. A big thanks to Bianca and the Apereo team. They're fantastic partners. As Bianca mentioned at the beginning of today's conversation, this is the first in a series of 3 events that we'll be offering this fall. We'll be sending out a follow-up message with more details about the remaining series, and we hope you can join us. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.